All right, welcome to the live production hangout in the Church Tech community. We've got quite a crowd with us today, and so without further ado, we're just going to jump right in. We're talking about live production systems, and a lot of that, a lot of you will look at that as multiple cameras being switched to either a recording and or a live stream out to the internet. So we have a very distinguished panel with us today, and we're going to start things off with Mr. Paul Allen Clifford, Mr. Video himself. And Paul, why don't you just break down what a live production system consists of?
Okay, well, I guess you can't get any more basic than needing a camera to capture it and something to output it to. And it just doesn't get any more basic than that. But that's not a very good system. That's the I have no other choice and we only need something for like a minute system. A better system would have at least two, probably more cameras, and it would have a video switcher to switch between the signals, something to record or display the video with, and you'd have some sort of support system, either shoulder-mounted cameras, tripods, communication system so that the director and technical director can talk to the camera people. Obviously, you would need sound. Obviously, you would need lighting if you're not doing it outside. If you are doing it outside, then you might need some reflectors or some other things to make the lighting better. But those are kind of just the bare minimums of what you would need to make a video production system working, and you can go from just a very basic system all the way up to something that they use to cover the Super Bowl. But it all basically boils down to those parts.
Great, great.
Tim, did I miss anything?
Well, I don't think so. Let's take a poll real quick and see if anybody has any questions. I haven't seen any questions in the chat pop up, so if you guys here in the group just want to post questions in the chat, that would help speed things along and make sure that we're actually addressing things that people have questions about. Paul, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the different kinds of recording devices.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back in time, originally there was no way to record video. So that's why if you look at what we have of the lunar landing, it really looks horrible. And part of that is because videotape was just barely getting started. So back in the early days of television, they'd actually set up a movie camera in front of a television and record it that way. Then they went to videotape, and there's all kinds of videotapes, 3/4 inch, Betacam SP, what was the one that Panasonic had? Doesn't matter. But there were all kinds of videotapes. Then we went to digital videotapes, and now we're recording primarily in digital formats to either memory cards, solid-state drives, hard drives. It just depends on different systems, what is appropriate, but we're past the days of needing to play back your entire video in order, in real time, in order to capture it and do anything with it. Now it's just a file that you drag and drop and you can deal with it then. That's predominantly what I've seen, at least in the prosumer kind of church world. There's still some tapes out there. They're just not as prevalent as they were 10 years ago when I did local news, where we put everything on tapes.
Right, you know, like the DVC Pro or the the venerable DV
It was all
cam.
DVC Pro.
No, that was the Panasonic format, as proprietary format, wasn't it?
Well, DVC Pro is actually very similar, at least in the editing world, to Mini DV. And you could get a little adapter that would adapt a Mini DV tape to a DVC Pro tape, and you could play it back on the DVC Pro deck. So I saw that happen more than once, where someone would show up at the station with a Mini DV tape, and then they'd throw that in the adapter and make it work.
Sure.
So
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thanks for that breakdown, Paul. That definitely helps us.
no problem.
Um, just curious, how many of us here in the group actually, and just by a show of hands, how many of us have an actual video production or a live production system in our churches right now? Oh, Paul. Okay, good. Darren's giving me a sideways thumb, so I guess that means he kind of has one.
We've got one getting installed for the first time ever in a week or two.
Okay, that's always a good place to be, especially Steve. I see that you're looking for some guidelines, so you're a complete noob, I guess.
That's an overstatement or understatement. I'm sorry.
Understatement. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Paul, actually, maybe you can talk about this. Darren says he has Wirecast, and I know that Wirecast is a product that you love and adore and use every day. Can you talk about, maybe start us off with why Wirecast would be considered a switcher?
Yeah, so Wirecast enables you to do all kinds of stuff that back in the old days you needed hardware to do. So you can take in a video signal in a few different ways and switch between your video signals. You can have still images, audio, video, anything that you want to put on live you can do with the Wirecast switching system, and it also has the ability to record what you're doing and stream what you're doing. And what's really one of the reasons that I really like it is the thought that I can stream to multiple streaming hosts. So I'm not doing that right now because my internet is iffy. But once I get better internet, my plan is to stream HD to multiple streaming hosts so that I could have a backup. If one goes down, no problem, go to the other stream. And that would just be, I love the flexibility of that. Adobe Flash Media Live Encoder, which is another piece of software that a whole lot of people use. It's free, but there's the reason that it's free, and that is it doesn't provide any switching capability. Whatever you put into it stays in it. And you can only output to a single streaming provider. So of the two that I've used Flash Media Live Encoder and I've used Wirecast. Wirecast is the one that I prefer. So I guess that's what I would say about it.
Okay, excellent. Now, again, we're trying to address some basics, and one of the big things is when you have more than one camera, and even when you only have one camera, where you put that camera or where you put those cameras is absolutely critical to how well your end product is going to be. So I know that when I'm setting up a system, if I have, let's say, two cameras, one will always be down the center, always. And that's, I mean, it's kind of an industry standard. And then the other one, I will either put down center right beside it, and so one has a long, a wide shot, or a wider shot, let's say a medium shot, and the other one has a close-up, so I can cut between the two, or it'll go on the side. And Paul, maybe you could talk about those side cameras. What's an ideal, let's say, span of angles that you think would be good? Are we looking at like a 45-degree angle off center? Is that ideal? What have you seen works the best?
Well, I think in a live switching environment, primarily what I've seen used most, other than churches, is cuts. Now, if you go to a lot of churches, you'll see that they tend to overuse the T-bar. But when you're using a cut, in order to keep from having a jump cut, you need a change of 30 degrees, 30%, etc., bare minimum. So if I was going to put those two cameras right next to each other, then you'd want one that's zoomed in at least 30% more than the other one. If you're going to move them off axis from one another, I'd say at least 30 degrees. But you don't want to go past 180 degrees. Imagine a line cutting through your pastor through the middle of his head. You don't want to go behind him, otherwise it gets a little confusing and disjointed to the viewer. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but that's where I would start. I'd start with, from a 3D standpoint, keeping the camera about eye level to the pastor, maybe a little lower, but definitely, if you can avoid it, don't put it up in the balcony looking down on someone who's supposed to have something important to say, because we only look down, quite literally, on people that are of lower status than us, children. And without the physical cue of knowing that you are higher, psychologically it says that this isn't as important. At least that's what I've noticed in my own self and my own perception. So that's what I'd recommend. But what's your experience beyond that, Tim?
Well, my background is a pretty healthy mix of film production and live production. So, we were taught that what Paul is referencing is what we call in the film world the 180-degree rules. So once you have established a line of action, which, as he explained fairly well, is, let's say you have a flat front to your stage, that would be your 180-degree line that you will not cross. Because what happens is when you cross that line, all of a sudden your subject jumps to the opposite side of the frame. And it's very disorienting, and it's just something that you want to avoid. Paul is also correct in, of course he is, he's an expert, in the 30-degree off-center, or not off-center, but 30-degree difference in angle. If you're closer than that, then the angle is close enough between the two cameras that it's also not, it's disorienting. So 30 degrees or more, and I would say you want to, go maybe up to 70 degrees at the most, just to really err on the side of safety. I know that we all come from churches with probably vastly different architectural elements and designs for the auditorium or the sanctuary. So you got to just kind of use your best judgment. And one of the things I would do is, before you actually choose the place where you're going to put your cameras, is once you get your cameras, just power them up and walk around the space. You know you're going to have one in the center. So, pace out or figure out roughly what 30 degrees is, and then from that 30-degree angle, start walking around the room away from center and see what looks the best. And don't just trust your eyes. Look through the camera, because what your eyes see versus what the camera will see can be very, very different. So that would be some recommendations that I would toss out. And let's talk about transitions, Paul. And of course, if anybody else has some thoughts, please jump in.
I have a quick question.
Shoot.
Just on camera positions. I know you're saying one down center that will be static. What about, because what we're looking at, we have two cameras, and what we're currently thinking is mounting them both as a static angle. Would you advise against that, having something on a tripod that follows the speaker? I mean, we're a bit limited on resources, so we're trying to think of the best way to set that up. As far as not needing another volunteer to run a tripod, was kind of our thinking, but not sure if that'd be just a big no-no or a doable scenario.
Well, I'm gonna toss this to Paul after I answer this, but I'm sure he has some very good thoughts on this. Do you already have multiple cameras, or what?
Yes, we have two right now.
Okay. And they both fit on a tripod, correct? That you don't have like a robotic PTZ?
No.
Okay.
No.
What I would say is I think it's okay to have one on a static wide, and then you would use the other one with your operator for the tighter shot. And that is because you can't have a static tight shot, because what's going to happen is you have somebody walking through the frame and then out of the frame and then through the frame and then out of the frame, and that's just no good for anybody. So you're going to have a brain running that camera and tracking the action. So that would be my recommendation. Paul?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's worth looking for more volunteers. I know that you might not know that you have them, but look for the guy that's always walking around with the DSLR at the church picnic. That's a potential camera guy. Look for a teenager that seems a little too engrossed in the fact that there are video cameras. That's a potential camera girl. I think it would be, at least see if you can add more, but I would think you're right, spot on, Tim. Bare minimum of having one that moves. Now, the camera could be on the tripod and not move from that position, but it should pan and tilt because someone is operating it. So I think that's what I'd do. That's what we did at my church about 12 years ago when we started doing IMAG, is we had two Canon GL2s, and they both were operated by people, and then we had a switcher, and that worked out really well. And on special occasions we'd borrow a third camera from the big church in town because they had old ones that they didn't always use. So that was really, really fun. So I think that's what I'd recommend if I were you.
Well, hopefully that helps, Steve. All right, thumbs up. Excellent. So I'm bouncing between a chat that we have going on in the community and here in the HOA. So, Paul, can you just talk to us about the difference and the importance of transitions, and why you would use certain ones in certain circumstances, and why you would never, ever use others?
Well, it sounds like you might have heard some of my opinions on the subject, because I'm a little opinionated.
Well, I have my own.
I've been to. Well, maybe it's just that we agree, and you know that we agree. But I have seen a lot of church people use like random transitions, and transitions mean certain things. If you don't believe me, watch movies, watch television shows, and pay attention to what transitions they use. Now, I say that it might be a little difficult to do because God did not design our brains to account for a change in more than 30 degrees or more than 30% instantaneously, which is what a good cut would do. So our brain just can't process that. So most of your transitions should be cuts, because your brain doesn't say, oh, there's a transition. I see that you've done another transition. Your brain just can't process that. So the vast majority of transitions, I think, should be cuts. If you're changing time or location, or occasionally during a song, I tend to recommend a cross dissolve from time to time. Now, if you're doing some pre-produced video and you have one shot and half of that shot is really good, and then something happens, and then the second half of another shot is really good, but really it can't handle that, there's what I call the, did that guy just walk through the screen wipe, which is, you see this in the movies all the time.
George Lucas.
If you pay attention anytime you see someone walk through a scene, that's not a mistake. It's not the case that there's just people wandering around and, oh, this guy walked through the scene. No, they know where everybody is at all times, and they're fixing something. So there's that. Then if you wanted to go old school, like in the 50s or earlier, they used a lot of wipes to show change in time and location. And since Star Wars is supposed to be like a 1930s serial, that's why George Lucas used a lot of wipes, but they've fallen out of favor. So anything with 3D, cube, or spin in it, I'd say probably never use. Especially the 3D cube spin, that would really be the case that you wouldn't use that. I was at a event one time where I saw a guy use what I can only imagine is like the home improvement transition. You remember when they would go to commercial and home improvement, like all sorts of craziness would happen? Well, that was just part of that particular show. But they only did it when they went to commercial. But this was like the whole screen squished down and then walked away. Actually, from your perspective, it would be walked away towards me. And it was just the goofiest thing I'd ever seen. And I think he just said, oh, here's one I haven't used, and hit that button. So I think if you want quality, you stick with mostly cuts, an occasional cross dissolve, beginning and the end, fade to black, fade up from black. Those are fine. But the naked woman cartwheeling through the scene, stick clear of that unless you're doing a James Bond movie.
Yes, Paul and I are in definite agreement there, and more so than that, you know, it's simply because as church techs using technology, the technology, whenever possible, should be transparent. And if you're doing things like 3D cube transitions and that kind of thing, you're really simply just drawing attention to yourself. And it's not about you, it's about God. And in order for it to be transparent, you need to do what the professionals do, and that is cuts at spoken word, dissolves for music. And you know, if you have a fast-paced song, you know, if you've got a beat that's going pretty fast, you can get away with cuts. You know, a lot of the professionals do that now. So that is a good breakdown. Thank you, Paul. In the chat over to the side, there was a question as to the difference between a cross dissolve and a fade, and I described it as a fade is just a fade, or is a cross dissolve to or from black, whereas a cross dissolve itself is from camera to camera or source to or source to source. You know, depending on what vernacular you want to use. So I'd like to talk about entry-level systems. You know, a small church, maybe 150 people, they'd like to get a couple cameras going through a switcher and then stream out to the internet. What are we talking about as far as a system? And you know, I want to stay away from cost because, you know, again, it's very particular and unique to each situation. But what kind of components are we looking at, Paul?
Well, you need some cameras. You need a way to get those into whatever is doing the encoding, and then you need an internet connection. So that's bare minimum. In my setup that I use for the Church TechCast network, I have a Logitech 1080p camera. The model escapes me right now, and that plugs into my MacBook Pro, which has Wirecast on it. And so Wirecast handles the switching, and it also handles the encoding. And once you're doing that, then it sends it off to churchstreaming.tv, who handles my bandwidth and all that fun jazz. So that's kind of a bare minimum. You can do a software-based switcher, or you can do hardware. Hardware tends to be more reliable, but also more expensive. Software tends to sometimes have issues, and it's less expensive, so that would be why. Blackmagic makes one called the ATEM Television Studio. I've used it once or twice and had good results. It's hardware, but it has an interface over the network, so you could control it with the computer, but the hardware is actually doing the heavy lifting. So that's something a lot of churches are going with, or something like Wirecast. If you wanted to take a step up, Newtek's TriCaster is certainly something a lot of people use. Then from there we go up to, higher end switchers like Ross's and Grass Valleys and all kinds of stuff. So whatever you're doing, probably the piece that I've left out is how do you get the signal from your camera into your computer or into, it could be an encoding appliance. Blackmagic makes one, Teradek, I don't think it's actually, I think that's their product. The people that make the Teradek also have a streaming appliance. The TriCaster has streaming built in. So it could be the case that you need to have a specialized capture card to get your video into the computer if you're using something based on the computer, or it could be the case that, for example, with the Blackmagic appliance, I think it will take HDMI in or HDSDI, either one of those, and depending on your camera, it could be that you already have that. So it's not all that difficult. It's just getting it all to work together. I will say that there's one thing that I'm seeing in the chat room that I'm a little concerned about, and I could be totally wrong, but I believe Livestream has a piece of hardware that you can buy that's fairly inexpensive compared to some other systems. But my big concern is if Livestream raises their prices, or they won't let you do what you want to do, or just fill in the blank, some reason that you would want to leave them, then you've got a piece of hardware that wouldn't work on any other system. So I've talked to a church in my state that uses that, and they love it right now. But it's just something to keep in mind as you're making these decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you're looking at going into live production, let alone streaming, just live production, there are a lot of moving pieces. Even in the simple systems, there are just a lot of moving pieces. That's just the nature of it, and it can be somewhat daunting to figure out. Okay, I have two cameras. How am I going to get the video signal from the cameras to the? Oh yeah, that's right. I need a switcher. So that's a wire, and then from the switcher to the recorder, that's a wire, and I have to be able to see the signals, the images from the camera, so I need a monitor of some kind. And now now we're going to add live streaming, so I need either a computer that I can bring in the signal to, or I need, as Paul mentioned, a streaming appliance that I can put bring in audio and video on one end, and then at the other end I've got, it goes out over the Ethernet cable to the internet. And then what kind of connection do I need? Am I doing HD? Am I doing SD? Am I down converting it to, heaven forbid, 340 by, or 320 by 280? Whatever it is. I mean, there are a lot of decisions to make. And one thing that I haven't heard addressed, Paul, and maybe you covered it, and I was just distracted with the chat and all the back end stuff. But how do you communicate? Let's assume that you have two camera operators running two cameras. How do you communicate with them?
Well, I have tried a lot of things, because when we first got into this, we had no money, zero. So our first try was hand gestures, did not work at all. Don't even waste your time, doesn't work. You look slightly off to the side for half a second and you miss an indication that your shot is coming up. So hand gestures, bad. We tried two-way radios, also bad. because only one person can talk at a time, and especially if there's a female voice. At the time, we had a female TD that would switch out with me, and her voice just, it was, you couldn't make out anything. So that wasn't useful at all. The first hacked solution we came up with was basically we built a closed circuit telephone system from parts on Radio Shack, and that worked for several years. But the right way to do it is a communication system like the ones from Telex, Clearcom, etc., professional systems. Once you try those, you will know why they are professional systems. It's clear, it's beautiful. You can actually understand what people say all the time. You can get headphones that cover your ears, or if those start to hurt, you can get really light ones that just sit on top. It's just better in every way. So communication systems, or comms as they're called, are what we use to communicate. There's usually a base station that where all the power and everything goes, and then there are other places where just there are ancillary connections which can be wired or wireless with the high-end systems, and those are just great.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and then, you know, some of them are 2 channels, and so you can have the audio team or the lighting team on a different channel from the video, or, you know, channel 2 can be your stage manager. I mean, we may be getting a little ahead of ourselves as far as the sizes of the teams and all that, but just really quickly here, I can sympathize with your experience, Paul, with the intercom, because we started out with 2-way radios, but you know, little Motorola talkabouts, but we couldn't figure out how to turn off the burp sound after, you know, you transmit. And I tell you, man, for a conservative Adventist church in the middle of prayer, that's just not an option. So we ended up going with an Anchor Audio Portacom system. And, you know, that's been pretty solid, and I think they just upgraded to a wireless system now. But, yeah, you got to think about that, because you've got to be able to communicate with your people. Because, you know, if they don't know what you want, then they don't know what to give you. And if you're switching between cameras with no communication, then you're really walking a fine, dangerous line, because the second you switch to a camera, they may change their shot on you, and then the whole thing comes crashing down. So
right, even with good communication, that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
So you want to try and minimize it even more.
Yeah, exactly. And then, okay, so you've got an intercom system. Now you have to figure out the vernacular, or the language that you're going to use. And you know, I'm pretty sure that, Paul, you've blogged and broadcast on this topic. I know I have. The information is out there, and I don't know if we want to go into it. You know, we're starting to run short on time, but Paul, there seems to be quite a lot of interest in streaming providers, and you know, what are the pros and cons, and what are the, especially with the free ones, or the low-cost ones. You know, let's take YouTube, for instance. They have a streaming service now. What would you say are some of the drawbacks to look out for?
Well, in my opinion, the biggest problem is one of customer service. Now, you're probably thinking it's copyright, but it really comes down to customer service. That there's no person that you can talk to over at YouTube and say, hey, here is my license. I will give you a copy. Frame it, put it wherever you want in the Googleplex, but we have permission to do this. There's nobody. So right now I'm fighting a fight not with streaming video, but with pre-recorded video, with a song that I have explicit written permission to use. I apparently have excellent taste because I found a band about a year before they were signed, and they gave me permission to use one of their songs because they didn't have a record contract. They just figured the more people hear our music, the better it is. So they gave me written permission in an email on some hard drive somewhere that says, "Hey, we're cool with you using the song." Fast forward to this year, which that was 2006. I got that permission. Fast forward to now, and I'm getting takedown notices that I'm using this music without permission. So I dispute those. And whoever at the record company, or I think it's actually another company that is administrating it for the record company, doesn't accept the truth that I have permission for this. So they keep claiming my work, even though I have written permission to use it. So that's the kind of thing we see at YouTube. In live streaming, if you're very fortunate, if your church uses any copyrighted music whatsoever, if you have the streaming license, you will say every time, "Yes, I've got the streaming license," and they will accept that. I've heard at least one case, I think it's Darren who's in the chat, who, while he was streaming, they were taken down during the stream. And you can't do anything about it on Sunday morning. You can say after church, "Hey, we had permission to do that," and then next week they might take you down again, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the biggest problem I have with YouTube, is a customer service issue. I can't talk to a person to make them understand. So we just have a problem.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so that's YouTube streaming. Use with caution and at your own risk, is what it sounds like. Now, a lot of the popular streaming providers, at least in my experience, they may have changed it, like to offer a level of free, a free level of service that comes with, its own drawbacks. The biggest of the the biggest drawback, in my opinion, is ads. They'll run ads either in the player before and or after your stream, or they'll run it alongside, and you have no control over those ads, and sometimes that can be rather offensive to the people who are watching a church service and watching and seeing, I don't know, a beer ad with scantily clad women on the side of your video. That's certainly something to be worried about. Paul?
Yeah, I've heard story after story of inappropriate advertisement, and also some of the streaming companies will interrupt your stream mid-stream for an advertisement. So, and it's not like they pick up where they left off. You miss 30 seconds, and that could have been a very important 30 seconds. It could be that your pastor was leading up to the point about why God loves us so much, how Jesus' death on the cross proves it, but he didn't quite get there, and then there's a car commercial, which, nothing offensive about the car commercial, it just happens to have really bad timing, and then you come back after he's hit the point that was all the wind-up was for. So that's also a bit of an issue. Even if it's not inappropriate, is it the case that there's a pre-roll as soon as someone joins, and so they miss 30 seconds of the whatever's going on at that point? Is there a mid-roll that could come at any time? Or is there a post-roll that just takes over things right when they're talking about how God's really interacted with them? Any of those things are problems that you could have if you go with a free service.
Okay, excellent. And I know that, as churches, large, medium, small, wherever we're at, in the churches that we attend, especially this year, budgets continue to get tighter and tighter, and I know that a lot of the smaller churches, their AV departments have zero budget, and it's strictly on well, if you have a need, you create a proposal, and we'll approve it or deny it. Or maybe there's an understanding that, well, we have wireless mics, so batteries, we're going to have to keep buying batteries every month. Whatever arrangements you have, the money may or may not be there to pay for a monthly streaming provider. If that's the case, then I would have to ask the question, why are you streaming? If the church is not going to support it, then why are they doing it? Because in that case, it would very much sound like somebody in leadership or somebody who decided that it was important got the ear of the leadership and said, this is something we need to do. Is the motivation because XYZ church down the road is doing it? Well, if you're trying to copy or keep up with other churches, then that's not the right motivation. The right motivation would be because you have a message that needs to be heard, number one, and two, it's evangelistic. This is a way to increase the size of the impact that the church has. So I would really check motivation and where your heart's at and why you're doing it in the discussion before you even start doing it. Because again, if you're trying to keep up or trying to be trendy, then I would contend that is not a good motivation. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I actually talked about this on today's show. I went through 8 mistakes that pastors make, and that was number 8. It's doing video of any sort just because another church is doing it, not because this is a good way to reach people, not because it's an effective way of communicating, not for any reason other than, oh, I saw that Willow Creek does this, so therefore we should. Or I saw that Life Church does this, so therefore we should. That's not a good reason. And another mistake is doing things too early. If you're just barely able to do this production, maybe it's time to save a little bit longer so that you have a little bit more flex. I mean, there's nothing worse than, well, we just barely afford everything, and then there's a power surge and it knocks out one of your key pieces of equipment. Or we're just barely able to stream, and then our streaming provider raises the price 50%. Or, just fill in the blank. So I think that there's a piece of that. And don't hear me saying don't use video, because I love video. I think it's the greatest thing that we've got today to reach and communicate with people. But I also think that there are a lot of pastors that are pulling the trigger a little early, and a little patience would really help everything.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you, Paul. So I'm going to bounce things around a little bit, and Charles, I will get to your comment in just a minute, but let's start with Steve. Go ahead and unmute yourself there, Steve. I'm a little curious, maybe you could just give us a rough, quick 30-second breakdown of what does the system look like that you guys are about to implement and deploy?
Sure, I'll do my best. Because I hear you guys using lingo and acronyms, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And a lot of it's the same with some of the equipment we're getting. I know we're going to be running Blackmagic for a switching solution. I think it's just an entry-level unit. I don't know specifically what kind. We're just running 2 kind of consumer-level HD cameras. We're going to feed into that along with our PC or our slide feed. And what the initial goal or reason to even do this for us, might be easier to kind of walk it back from there, is to have the ability to send a mixed feed to our balcony that does not have a good line of sight to the stage, and then to also some overflow rooms on the campus as well. So a big part of our goal is a mixed feed, and then a feed that we could then route to other areas of the campus without losing much quality. So we're sending those cameras into the Blackmagic, and then from there, after we mix that, we're sending that into a PoE device by a company called Just Add Power, and it does what's, again, I'm going to use terms and I don't understand it, but routable IP. So essentially we're sending out over IP and then routing that around the campus, and then we have little converter boxes that converts it back into HDMI without losing a quality on the signal. It's a little bit theoretical. We've done some testing with some loaner equipment, and it appears to be working as expected. But we'll be getting all the equipment and plugging it in the next week. So that's kind of where we are. And I know we're doing a recording solution that's some separate piece of hardware. I couldn't tell you what it is, except that it costs a little extra juice, but it was good for the long run. So that's about all I know, though.
Okay, well, that's good. And basically what your rundown has given us is it's given us a picture of what your church looks like. You know, it's a fairly large campus, it sounds like, and you know, it gives us an idea of what your needs are and how you are approaching and meeting those needs. So thanks.
Yep.
And hopefully we'll be able to provide some more education in a future hangout for you as far as vernacular and acronyms and all those things.
I'll be sure to post all my failings and follies, so you can all have, all the knowledgeable people can have a good laugh. So.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So we're gonna jump over to Charles, and Charles, maybe you could give us an idea of what the system looks like that you have, or what your interest is in a live production system.
Okay, first of all, just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. I might have some loud background noise occasionally.
Yeah, we can hear you.
And get some thumbs up. So pretty much I'm in East Texas, in a town of about 16,000 people. And in our area, pastors that are assigned out here tend to get assigned multiple churches. So in our area, we have 3 churches in our district, and we're sharing a pastor, and he's a young pastor that's willing to experiment with technology. So since about November, we have been live streaming between the 3 of our churches, and we have a paid account on Ustream. And basically what happens is that Ustream paid account follows the pastor. Whichever church the pastor's at that week is the church that's broadcasting, and then the other 2 churches watch. And it's been working pretty good for us for the most part with Ustream, with having, you know, a lot of the modern features on multi-platform mobile devices, embeddable on your website. But the one thing that's really starting to kind of get to us is the lack of a DVR feature. Because in this multi-campus environment, we're all trying to be coordinated where we start at 11:30, whether we're broadcasting or watching. And we never always get it right. And, you know, if you've got guests in your church, it's kind of awkward at times, you know, and it sets a bad experience for the guest. If they come into your church, you're ready on time, and another church, you start to tune in for them, and they're still doing like a children's story or special prayer time, and you have to wait for that. So we've been trying to find a DVR solution to kind of make things run a little bit smoother, and it's looking like we may have to change providers to live stream. And I'll kind of stop right there in case anybody else has any other questions. I know live stream has kind of been frowned upon in the past for ads, but they do have a new pricing structure which is very attractive. And I'll kind of leave it at that unless Tim wants me to elaborate on what I found out in the last, I guess, week as I've started researching this.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Okay, so pretty much in the last week, I've really been digging into live stream and playing with it here at the house. And they've really stepped up their game. The only thing that they still do that's a little bit annoying is they do not allow you to embed your stream on your website unless you have like a $400 a month large account. which kind of strikes me as strange because everybody else out there that has free stuff lets you embed it on their website. But other than that, they've got a lot of cool features. Like I said, they've got the DVR functionality that seems to be like it's going to be a blessing with a a multi-campus environment. It's also got the ability with some of their software where if you have the live stream app on a iPhone, Android device, another computer, or even Google Glass, where you can use that as a remote camera. So, the days of having to go out and buy 3 or 4, expensive cameras may be going by the wayside if you've got members in your congregation that have iPhones or tablets or whatever. They can start becoming remote cameras. So, I mean, it's some pretty slick stuff, and it's really convinced me to change it. Now, the downside is of course, I've tested their software on our computer at church, and that's the downside. Currently, like I said, we're using Ustream, and Ustream gives you a free toned-down version of Wirecast, which works great for us right now. But the live stream software is more resource-intensive, and our main broadcasting PC was built in 2008. So their software will run, but you got to have everything closed down on the computer to run their software. So if we change to them as a provider, we're probably going to have to buy a new PC. But considering it's 5 years old, we're kind of on the verge of an upgrade anyways when it comes to a PC. So anyways, that's kind of the experiences from this week.
Okay. Paul, I'm going to let you respond to that. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are in regards to Charles' setup and need for a DVR and all that.
Well, the way that we've done it, well, we're getting ready to do it. Our main secondary campus doesn't have very good internet, so we get a lot of buffering issues when we did this. But there's a system called Kulabyte, Kulabyte, that churches like Elevation Church in, I think it's South Carolina, uses, and they do two-way video with their campuses. But I don't know how much that costs because I wasn't in on any of that. I just showed up and they said, hey, we got this, and the people that did it know something about it. And then we played a little bit with it. Oh, looks like Tim has a link in the chat, and it seems to work well. At the time that I first was testing it, the GUI wasn't very good, so you could control it, but you had to bring up a menu over the screen that was actually showing the video. So that was something that they were at least working on. This is just me, and it might be because my audience is all online, but for me, having a video that I couldn't embed in my website is a non-starter. Table stakes in this area is embeddable video. So the way that you're using it, Charles, it could be that that doesn't apply to you, but for other churches, the thought in my mind of having to pay several $100s a month just to embed the video when everything else is great, that's just crazy to me. Because I know we've all talked about the just generic live streaming companies, but there are also Christian live streaming companies that cater more towards the church market. The ones I've used are Worship Channels and ChurchStreaming.tv, but there are others as well. And I guess probably across the board, the biggest thing is you need to pay attention to the details, because this one might be $25 a month plus so much per megabyte, and you might normally be under a certain threshold and think this is great, but what happens when there's a tornado in your area and half your congregation can't get to church because there's a big tree covering up the main drag? Their houses are fine, but they just can't get there. Or if you're in Florida, it's hurricane season, or if you're in Kentucky and you have another winter like we had this last winter where it was just crazy. You don't want all those people coming to church, and then next thing you know, you've got this horrible bandwidth bill that's 10 times what it normally is. So I think there are plenty of options out there. But to get back to your point about the DVR functionality, other than the kilobyte system, I think maybe this might be a better option for you, Steve, or not Steve, Steve was the other guy, Charles, is to have a campus host that introduces the stream and has a certain amount of material that he or she goes through, and then they get a 30-second high sign when the video is good to go, and then they wrap it up, and then they always go to it. That would be a low-tech solution, one that we did at my church when we were testing out just having separate worship in 2 different rooms, but the same sermon. And if you have the right host, that can absolutely solve that problem. So just another way of looking at things.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the ideas there, Paul. The kilobyte system, though, just to confirm, that's a piece of hardware you have to put in place at your host site, correct?
I don't know. Well, let me say this. At our remote campus, it was software-based for watching it. So
Okay.
I don't know what you need on the sending end. I don't know what you need on the live streaming provider end. But on the receiving end, it was all software. So we were talking about buying a computer especially for that. But
Okay, yeah, I just glanced at it, so I haven't really read through it, so sorry if I'm misrepresenting it, but it looked like it was hardware or software that you have to put on the broadcasting site. And that's why I was kind of drawn, once again, you were mentioning all the different providers out there. I'm kind of drawn to the big boys, if you will, the Ustreams, the live streams, because unfortunately, a lot of the Christian providers have had more limitations than the big boys. In fact, I've even been thinking about the fact that live streaming, you'd have to visit their website instead of embedding it in yours, which is, at first for me, was really a non-starter as well. I totally agree. But I might be able to embed the live stream link within an iframe. I'm going to experiment with that and see if it happens. If I can, that might win me totally over. But to kind of explain a little bit better about our situation, I'm at the church that primarily is the main technological side of the 3 churches in our district. It's in a town of 16,000 people. Our church is in the city limits. So we have a cable internet provider with 1.5 meg upload, which isn't much, but it's enough. However, the other 2 churches in our district, one is just outside the city limits. So unfortunately, a lot of the land-based internet providers don't service out there. So they're actually using a 4G LTE air card, or whatever you want to call them. Some people call them MiFis now, to get on the internet, and that's working very well for them. They're broadcasting very reliably. The third church, however, is a very rural church, probably a town of less than 1,000 people. Their internet provider is one of these line-of-sight wireless providers. You basically have to, it's almost like going back to the old TV days when I was a kid. You put an antenna up on your building, point it at a tower, and they get 1.5 meg upload, which works great on the weekend when they're broadcasting. But we had an evangelistic series that ran through the week during the 7 to 8 o'clock hour. Unfortunately, their internet provider, of course, had a limited upload speed from the provider back to the rest of the internet, so they were very unreliable for broadcasting during peak internet usage time. So we've had some challenges with bandwidth, but as long as we keep our broadcast to the weekend and off-peak times, that church seems to work good. So yeah, there's a lot of lessons you learn in a remote area once you start these things, but it's fun.
Well, thanks, Charles, for that. And yeah, when you get out into the rural environment, your options for ISPs and streaming really become limited, and that's something that I'm not really sure what the answer is. I know that if Google had their way, they'd have their Google blimps all over the place, and we'd all have free Wi-Fi. But even that has infrastructure and bandwidth limitations. Google is not all powerful. Sometimes I think they are, but anyway. So, well, we'll just have to kind of wait and see. 4G LTE, that's awesome that's working. I know that there are event videographers who stream like weddings live when they're out in the boonies or away from a wired connection or a Wi-Fi connection. So technology is definitely catching up with our needs, and that's really exciting. And I'm really actually kind of excited to hear just some of the ideas that you came up with, Charles, you and your team, as to how you're going to get over the hurdles and the obstacles that you had in your way. So that's awesome, very inspiring. So the last person that we have, actually, I'm sorry, we have Darren. Darren, why don't you go ahead and give us a real quick rundown of your system or the system that you're interested in.
Okay, sure. Evening, everybody. A small church in upstate South Carolina, and maybe 200 people seat, or sanctuary seats, maybe 200. And the reason we went to streaming is, for shut-ins or for people who are sick, and so it's only a handful of people that we have online. Although it also helps when people are coming into the area and they want to kind of see, how our services go and what kind of teaching do we have. They have the video there. Of course, I mentioned in the chat we use Vimeo Pro to upload our archives of our services. I started years ago at another church when I lived in New York using Real Server, and we were streaming video over bonded ISDN lines out to the internet. I mean, that was before DSL and cable came to houses. But being a small church, your budget is very, very limited. So our current setup actually is, and it works quite well for our needs, is we have a pretty, beefy video, what I call the video computer. It has 2 FireWire cards in it, and I have 2 standard def off-the-shelf camcorders. I have FireWire out going into it, so I don't have that 30-degree of separation that Paul was talking about earlier in the broadcast. But we do use it for one's for like a zoom-in shot, and then another fail-safe type shot that's pulled back. And then we started out using the free Ustream, and because that was before they had the ads. Then they started doing the ads, and that precipitated our search for something else, and down the $400 or $500 it was for the Wirecast, and very, very happy with the Wirecast product, and it's meeting all of our needs. I know that if and when we go to HD, I'm going to have to get a much more beefier computer, though, to support that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. But this is again another solution that you guys have come up with, and FireWire and standard def, those kind of went hand in hand and worked fairly well. And I remember starting in SD with FireWire and using that up until, oh man, probably 2 years ago. In the HDV version of that technology. And just out of curiosity, Darren, how soon are you looking to upgrade?
Not soon.
Not soon. Okay.
Not soon. Our current setup is meeting all of our needs. So
Okay.
yeah,
So yeah, your current system is meeting your needs, and you know, I mean, based on that, you know, the very definition of upgrading is, um, at least in my opinion, is you need to, you know, either to keep yourself from getting into a situation where equipment's not working, or just out of absolute necessity where you know equipment currently is not working. So as long as it keeps working, hey, great, that's awesome. The last person that we have is Preston, and Preston is actually unique in our group here because he's actually not in the country. He's in Honduras and has his own set of frustrations and obstacles. So, Preston, maybe you can unmute yourself there and give us a rundown of kind of some of the obstacles and challenges that you face.
How much time do we have? I appreciate you inviting me because it is a challenge. Our consistency with our bandwidth. At first, we thought it was the bandwidth. We finally got the bandwidth up to at least 2 megabytes of upload speed, but it's not consistent. So we can be running a broadcast, and all of a sudden, usually it would be like at 100%, it drops down to 20, and then we lose connection and it's done. So we got to start all over again. We don't have, obviously, being a third world country, we don't have a lot of opportunities to be able to pick and choose our providers. The providers that we have, we did switch to the new one, and they're a lot better than what we had before, so we're happy with that. But we're running we're running a digital camera as a webcam for many, many months, and you can actually go to our YouTube channel if you want to have a laugh. We actually had a thing that would actually focus on the face. And I had the hardest time trying to figure out how to turn that thing off. Finally figured that out. But now we have a little white thing in the middle. Obviously, when we're recording it actually on the camera, it actually will put the battery signal on there. So those are the kind of things we run into. Our soundboard is obviously a little bit older. We do have sound and video, or sound coming through 2 channels, or 1 channel, I guess it is. And I'm very new at this. I'm not really technically minded in this at all. I'm just kind of learning as I go. But it's fading into my laptop computer, and the sound is okay. But when we try to do music, it's distorted and it's horrible. So, but we originally started out with a webcam, trying to do it that way, and it was horrible because the lighting was off and everything else. So it's a process, and it's fun learning about you guys who have the bigger churches, or at least have the dual cameras, because I learned a lot from it. So I appreciate you having me in here.
Well, we definitely appreciate not only having you with us right now, but also having you in the community. It definitely gives us a international flair, and it just goes to show that we as Christians and we as church techs are truly universal. So
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. Let's see. Oh, he muted himself. Okay. So it shows that the struggles that we have every week are not just necessarily limited to just us. We don't own the market, as it were, on the struggles that we have. And it's through events and hangouts like this, and through interaction in the community, that we can support each other, and we can learn more about each other, and really have deep and meaningful relationship, even though we've never met. It's really awesome. So one other thing that I wanted to touch on real quick, Paul, was we didn't really talk about getting sound into the video, into the system, and there are a couple different ways of going about that. And just really quickly as we wrap up, maybe we could touch on that.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind to me is analog. So I'm envisioning that you take a feed out of your soundboard and you run that into your computer or your streaming appliance. Now, one thing that Preston mentioned, it sounds to me like what we've got going on there is a higher volume level or a hotter signal for music and then a much lower signal for speaking. So that makes perfect sense. One person talking versus a bunch of instruments playing, one is going to be much louder than the other. So if I was in that situation, I would figure out a way to get the music signal much quieter when it goes into the computer, or not as powerful, so that it can all be the same. Because otherwise, even if it wasn't distorting, if it was just really loud and not distorting versus listenable, people would have to turn up and down their computer based on what was going on, and that's ideally you wouldn't want to do that. At Willow Creek, they have a system called the Opera, and what that is, I took a tour a couple of years ago and they were showing this off. They patched together several pieces of gear to make sure that the audio was always even, always sounded good on all campuses at all times, streaming, etc. And that was their nickname. You can't like order an Opera unless you. I am supposed to talk to Todd Elliott next week, so maybe I can just ask him to send me the list of components, and maybe you could order an Opera in that case. But that's the first thing, is you can just bring that into the computer. But typically what goes into the computer is your computer expects a mic level signal, which is a lot lower power, for lack of a better term, than what's normally coming out of a sound mixing console. So I think that that's probably what's going on in Preston's area. And so you've got a mic input that's getting a line level signal that's going to cause you problems. Now there are outboard solutions you can get. You can get a different kind of sound card. You could get something even as inexpensive as, I sometimes use a Griffin iMic, which is a little USB dongle that will take an analog signal in, and it's very low. Well, it's somewhat low quality, but it works. And it's like a $30, $45 piece of gear, and it does it over USB. And that also solves some problems that occasionally you'll run into with the laptop, where there will be a buzz in the sound. Now you can also do this all digitally as well. If you have a desktop computer that has a digital input, you can take a digital signal and put that in and go from there. So I guess those are the first things that pop into my mind. Am I missing something, Tim?
Well, I think for me, when I was first starting out helping in the video department at my old church, 4 cameras, and we didn't start streaming until close to the time I left, which was 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. So when we first started, we just took a feed off of the front of house sound mixer, and we very quickly learned that we needed to have control over our own mix, simply because when you're mixing for a live environment, like a front of house mixer is, you're mixing for much different acoustical space than you are for recording and ultimately streaming. So we just buckled down and decided to get some mic splitters, and we got our own mixer, and we had to recruit somebody to run the sound, and usually that was the producer. So we had a producer, director, and 4 camera people. So we had 6 people on every week. Now I understand smaller churches don't have those kind of resources. So maybe you're just splitting off the pastor's mic out of the insert of your front of house mixer, and maybe a CD thing, or it depends on what you're recording and how you're using it ultimately, and that has to be the decision that you make. But I would say get to the point where you're doing your own mix as much as possible. If at the very least, get an insert off the pastor's mic if that's all you're recording, because that will help you get a much cleaner signal that hopefully doesn't have some of the errors and problems that a whole mix of multiple microphones and multiple channels will present to you if somebody else is doing it for a live environment. So, but other than that, getting the sound into the video stream or into the recording, yeah, it really depends on the situation that you have. Based on the equipment that you choose to purchase or already have installed, will determine how you're going to go about doing that. And I want to encourage you guys that Paul, myself, there's several others in the community that can help answer those questions if you have them. So hey, the community is there for all of us as a resource, as a support system. And I just really encourage everybody to use it. And if you're not a part of the Church Tech community on Google+, hey, you know what? You probably already have a Google account. Just join, set up your account and join Google+ and join the community. We'd love to have you. Paul, Preston, Steve, any last words?
I was going to say, just as an intermediate step, going from straight off the board, which you're right, it doesn't sound very good, but it's better than using the on-camera mic, which sounds horrid.
Oh,
as an
yes.
intermediate step, having an ambient microphone that you can mix in a little at appropriate times, like pastor tells a joke, you turn up the audience microphone, the ambient microphone, so that you can hear some laughter. Then you turn that sucker back on down. That helps a little bit. It's also, the music sounds good in the room, but not on headphones. If you've noticed that when you're mixing sound, sometimes a little ambient will help some. It won't be as good as having someone mixing a special signal just for the streaming, but you're right, that's something that absolutely, that's the right way to do it, is to have someone mixing a separate signal for each place that it's heard. Or, like you'd have someone mixing for satellite campuses, and then you would have someone mixing for the web. That would be the best way. Unfortunately, that would also be the most expensive way. So we got to do what we got to do.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And, I just want to say one last thing, and that is, again, going to the motivation of why we are in Church Tech, why we volunteer, those of us who are paid, why we do that. And for me, I do it because that's how I give back. I love to do it. Obviously, I've made a career out of doing video production for companies, and that kind of thing. But I love to do tech. It's part of who I am, and I do it to glorify God. And that means that I want to do it the best that I can. And in order to do that, we need to do it right. And I'm a huge proponent of, if you're going to do something that's worth doing, you're going to spend the time and the energy and the money to do it, then do it right. Now, I understand, budgets being tight and all that, but have that as an end goal at the very least, and figure out how you're going to make that happen. Because if we can't give our best to God, then who can we give our best to? So that's my final thought for the hangout. I want to thank you guys for joining me and Paul and the rest of us, and hopefully you got some value out of this, some education, and some tips and tricks, and hopefully you pulled something out of it. Whatever word you want to apply to it. So until next time. I'm Tim Adams, and we will talk to you later.